Welcome to the Women's Network. I'm Elke and I'm your host. Today we have a great show. A very, very interesting show, but more than that, it's a very, very important show. The subject of today's show is a quite heavy one, a lot of times very difficult to talk about. In fact, it has become quite a household word. And with that, I want to say, unfortunately, it has become a household word, in our society today. About 2 years ago, I was trying to discuss it with one of my guests today. However, at that time, for some reason or another, we didn't get to it, and I'm really glad that we are sort of catching up because, as I said earlier, it has become a very, very important subject. And with that, I mean the domestic violence and battered women. I have with me today 4 people. They are all very knowledgeable and brought with them a lot of information to share with you and to inform you, tell you a little bit about what they have experienced, what they know about the subject of domestic violence and battered women. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce you to my 4 guests today, and they will give you a little bit of a background as to what they're involved in and what they're doing. So let me start off with my first guest, Miss or Deputy Sheriff Janet Applegate, who is also the Commissioner on the Commission of Status on Women.
I'm on the State Commission for the Status of Women. And I also work currently as a Deputy Sheriff in the Court Services Division.
Great. And to your right is Lieutenant Chuck Jackson. You are with the branch of domestic violence?
Yep, I'm a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Department. I'm our department's representative to the Los Angeles County Domestic Violence Council, and also responsible for our department's training in domestic violence issues.
Very good. And I have to my left Alan Ross, who is a marriage and family counselor.
Right. Hello, Elke. Thank you for inviting me here today. This is really an honor because I do work with couples who are involved with domestic violence, individuals who have been involved with child abuse in their younger years, and this is a great opportunity to discuss this in an open forum. Thank you.
And last but not least is Connie McFall. She is the head, or she works with the Rainbow Domestic Shelter.
Rainbow is actually Rainbow Services, and we provide comprehensive services for women and children who are surviving domestic violence. We don't concentrate only on our emergency shelter, and fail to mention that we're very pleased that Jeanette has joined our board of directors and see that her knowledge will be a great help to our agency.
Great. Now, Connie, Janet, and Chuck, you are involved with shelters and the status of women and so on, and you have your Rainbow Shelter. How, before you establish these shelters, how does it all get started? And maybe I will direct this question to Alan, because I think the women and children and families come to her first to discuss it, unless and they go to a shelter that they know of. However, I guess first you go to your best friend or whatever you do. I don't know exactly. So maybe you should start out, lead off, and from that moment on, let's just kind of talk and interact a little bit and see what we have to discuss.
Well, it's been my experience that domestic violence isn't a one-time incident that happens in a vacuum. It is usually preceded by years and years of experience with violence that gets normalized and tolerated, especially by women. And when they finally come to my office, I usually hear a complaint that so-and-so is trying to get me to be a certain way, and it's my fault that he's in a bad mood. if, of course, it's a male perpetrator for a woman. And a woman feels as if she has to create a loving environment for this male, and at any moment he can go off. And she takes this responsibility upon herself that the fault of his bad behavior is hers. And so oftentimes there's a real apprehension to go out and report this into the community, to even make a phone call to a crisis line in fear, or to a sheriff, because they'll want to know the name of the abuser. They'll want to know, how can I get to help you? And then suddenly there's a click at the other end of the phone. That might be your experience. And so when we ask women to please be there for themselves, they've already had such a degree of learned helplessness, a sense of hopelessness, that the only thing they think they can do is fix what's going on in their house. And it's really a double blind, because there's no way to fix it. And a lot of times I liken this to the Stockholm Syndrome, where people are held hostage. And the slightest civility is taken as a great kindness. And there we go, we forgive the man. There's also a syndrome that happens where there's a buildup of violence. And it can be verbal and emotional violence that can turn into a minimal assault, you know, and then women dismiss it, and then the energy falls out of that, and then the husband is kind and he wants to make his way back in, or boyfriend wants to make his way back in, and so the kindness starts, and the woman thinks, oh, this is great, and she lets him back in, and it all starts again. Another thing that happens at the very top of that peak is women want that to happen already. Let the violence be over. So sometimes you hear women tell you, well, it was my fault. I pushed him to that, just so we could get this over with and we could make up.
Oh, God.
And so,
one of the things that I hope that the public will become aware is that this term domestic violence, unfortunately, I think puts a lot of women in jeopardy, because there's an assumption that if I am not being physically assaulted, I am not in an abusive relationship. And I think the whole issue of power and control becomes an issue. More women are physically battered, and women are in more danger in their homes. I think the last FBI report said that the home is the most dangerous place for a woman to be assaulted. In the United States, more women annually are physically assaulted by their loving partners than by rape, muggings, and automobile accidents combined. But we are cautioning all people, because the issues of power and control exist in same-sex relationships. They exist in partner relationships that are not married, and adolescent relationships. So that we need to not focus on the fact that this is necessarily a traditional family issue, because that, I think, blocks off a number of people who are affected by this. And yes, it's funny, she said the woman thinks, well, I'll just get it over with. We hear the batterer saying, well, she made me do it. And that's very typical, is that with the cycle of violence, with the build-up period, many times there is a feeling, I know the honeymoon period's coming afterward, let's get this over with. But in terms of Rainbow Services, we're looking to provide a continuum of care. Come in when you're first feeling uneasy. The first time he hits, don't think it's an isolated issue.
Right.
It's going to happen again. It's almost a disease like alcoholism, that the periods of abuse will get shorter and shorter. So we're looking on a concentration of a continuum of services. Come in, get the support group, get the counseling, get support for your children before it becomes a continuous matter, and before you're dead.
So make it like a prevention.
Right. Yeah, many times when I go out to speak, many people, because we're dealing with tax dollars, will say, how successful are you? And being a fairly sarcastic person, I always say, well, they're still alive. But that's no joke. This is a life-saving issue.
yes.
The women that I came in contact with, I worked for many years as a bailiff in Department 8 of Superior Court, which issues the restraining orders. And this is, a lot of times, this is the first place women do come. They know that you can come to court to get a court order to restrain the defendant from coming near you. And many times the women that I spoke to, because I'm bilingual, I often assisted as a clerk because we didn't have any bilingual clerks at that time. So as the bailiff there, I would sit down with them and help them write out restraining orders. And I'd say, okay, what happened? And they'd explain to me. And I always would hear this vicious cycle. Well, 2 months ago he hit me, and it was my fault because I overspent on the budget. And then we made up, and he promised he wouldn't do it again. And then last night he came home and he really beat me up, this time worse. And it's a cycle, as we've stated before. And I really would like to see this cycle stopped. And I also want to emphasize too that the violence isn't just men on women, as Connie had said earlier. Sometimes it's same-sex relationships, or sometimes women against men. We had a very good friend who was murdered by his wife in San Pedro. But most of the cases we do get are women that are being battered in their home. And we on the commission are very well aware of this that is taking place. We recently held public hearings in the state of California, and we emphasized the hearings on adolescent medicine was our hearings. And when we talked to women who would come to speak to the commission, many times they would talk about what was going on in the home life for these teenagers. And then when the teens would speak to the commission directly, they would state that we're really feeling bad because we're in a home where this is taking place. It's making me depressed, and I can't function in school. That's something that we, the commission, are trying to work on in the area of domestic violence, getting the legislature informed as to what is happening out there in the area of domestic violence.
Yeah, but then we go back to the very initial start. I mean, we have to get the women or the children out of there before it goes on and on and on. Like you said, you would like for them to come to the Rainbow Shelter and get sort of like a training, you know, before it gets to the point of murder.
I think this gets into the issue of probably broader philosophical issues rather than just services, is until we have a society that allows more equitable relationships between people, even some would dispute this, with having children have some equity in their family situations, that's going to be difficult. I don't know if each of our individual therapists, one agency, the Sheriff's Department, until we begin to concentrate, and I think the Sheriff's Department, now working with the county supervisors that I think Chuck's going to refer to, are making some moves towards that consolidated approach that we haven't seen before.
I agree with you. I think it's really important to also inform people and teach them about their rights, their human and alienable rights.
I'd like to Chuck to talk about what our department's getting involved in.
Unfortunately, we usually get the calls on the 911 lines, and it is a matter of physical violence. Our deputies, just like any law enforcement agency, get out there, and what they generally find, excuse me, is a woman who has been beaten or battered by her spouse or live-in partner. And she's in this state of physical trauma. The deputies are sitting there uncertain as to how they're going to handle this. Is there an available shelter? We need to get medical services. Can we get the woman out of this environment to a protective place? Are there any children in the house? What can we do for them? The legislature has enacted several laws that are now helping us. We can get emergency protective orders on a telephone. Once we make an arrest, in fact, the arrest situations have been simplified now. The deputies or law enforcement officers can make an arrest with any sign of physical injury or complaint of pain, and that will take the batterer out of the house and into the legal system. The problem is we still have the woman and or her children left there. Currently, with the aid of the Board of Supervisors, have been involved with a panel looking at domestic violence throughout Los Angeles County, and the Sheriff's Department really looks at domestic violence as involving the entire family. Most of your experts will tell you that if a child is in a home, witnesses his mother being beaten, that image, that trauma lasts a lifetime. And unless we do something about that, we're going to lose another victim to domestic violence in the future.
Exactly.
Also, we were talking about the elders that are in a home. Oftentimes, that abuse to them is not necessarily physical, but the elder is kept in a home because of the need for money coming in, and they may be a resource for money. That is still a sign of abuse. We need to take care of those problems. The Sheriff's Department, working with the District Attorney's Office and several other county agencies, have devised this proposal that we're working on to create a team approach, a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with domestic violence in the county. And it's an experimental program that should start up soon. Connie and I talked about it, that maybe her agency could be involved, other agencies involved. But we really want to get to the root issue. The sheriff himself has come out, and he's looking for some state legislation mandating training for primary and secondary age school kids. We have to start at the beginning. If we don't deal with the kids first, they will become the batterers of tomorrow.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we found when we did our hearings on adolescent medicine, that it's just a vicious cycle. The mother's beaten in the home, the kids grow up in this environment, and then they think it's acceptable. The girls, as teens, get into relationships where their boyfriends are battering them.
And as adolescents, it's very seductive. Batterers are you love this person.
Right.
There was something that attracted you to this person. You have shared your most intimate moments with it. And particularly as an adolescent, if you've got your first boyfriend saying, I love you so much, I don't want you talking to anybody else, you have to be with me all the time. And as the mother of 3 daughters, we all know that adolescence is a time of breaking away. So these young women are in particular danger, because even if their parents know, you're surely not going to give your mother credit for knowing that we're beginning to see that adolescent young women in battering situations are in a particularly vulnerable place. They truly have no means to go anywhere. And I don't know, Chuck, you may know, it was our understanding that an adolescent below the age of 18 can't take out a restraining order.
There were some changes, and I can't be absolutely right now, but an adolescent under the age of 18 with either a guardian, it doesn't have to be legally a court-appointed guardian, can get a restraining order against some type of partner. It doesn't have to necessarily be a husband or boyfriend type of relationship. There must be some type of adult guardian. It does not have to be a family member. So that legislation is out there. I'm not sure if it's enacted and current right now. I understand that it is. I haven't had any contacts with someone that's used it. So there is some little bit of hope out there for some adolescents.
How good are those restraining orders? I mean, how do they hold up?
Well, it's unfortunate.
I get a smile from all of you.
It's a restraining order is a piece of paper. And again, if it's one of those with new laws just passed, my deputies can now go out there on a phone call that somebody has violated a restraining order. The violation of a restraining order is a misdemeanor crime in California. So for a peace officer to make an arrest, it has to occur in their presence. Now, all a deputy or law enforcement officer has to be told the restraining order was violated, that person came here in violation of the order, they have since left. The deputies can now go out there, look for him, make the arrest, and take him to court. The Sheriff's Department has adopted a no cite-out policy, because usually misdemeanors, we issue them a citation to appear in court, so they're released without bail. That sounds like a great program, but the average bail for a restraining order is $250. So it's not a lot of money. Maybe to a 15 to 17-year-old it would be a lot, but a batterer, $250 is easily attainable.
But even though a restraining order is a piece of paper, and a piece of paper is not going to stop a bullet, but it does several things. It gives a measure of psychological security. It's finally an admission by the woman that, yes, this is a problem and I have to take some action.
Right.
And it's a paper trail, because eventually there's going to be another incident. And the breaking of the restraining order, when we talk to people on the hotline, one of the things we do is help them develop a safety plan. How much danger are you in? In Los Angeles County, there are 240 available shelter beds. There's actually not been, in the last month, a bed available in LA County.
Or they've been filled.
they've been filled. We have an 18-bed shelter. We've had 22 people in them. And of those 240 beds, 75% or more are occupied by children. When a battered woman leaves home, she takes her children with her. When she leaves to go to a shelter, she makes the choice to become homeless. She makes the choice to give up her employment. She gives up the children's school. It's a major move in a person's life. It's not something that people take lightly.
It is major, because what happens with a woman who seeks help to go to a shelter, it's for her safety. We do not place her in a shelter near her home.
Right.
So she'll say, well, I'll keep the kids in school and I'll go to the shelter down the street. You can't do that, because a batterer knows where the children are going to school. And often from the women I had spoke to, you know, this was a hard decision for them to make, because it means uprooting the kids' education and their friends, taking them from their friends. Right. But they have to leave, and let's say if you lived in Alhambra, maybe they'd put you at Rainbow Services, which is some distance away, for your own protection. So it's a big step, as Connie said, to make that decision, because you're moving your kids away from their friends, their school, and it's really for the victims' safety.
But isn't that the reason for that a woman would stay in this battered syndrome position longer than a norm? Because she doesn't want to leave her home. She doesn't know what to do with the children. She doesn't want to. I mean, that's really the factor that prolongs the whole situation.
I think Chuck can attest to this, that finances is one of the biggies.
Right.
I know for me, at one time, having been a battered victim, finances was a very, very important thing to me. I thought, you know, I didn't know about shelters at this time, and it was like he made the most money. I was dependent on him to take care of me and my daughter. And I think you can attest to that too, right?
That's generally the problem when our deputies are faced with in the field, is the woman might want to leave, but she is afraid to leave. That, unfortunately, it's called a security blanket. It's money, it's home.
Right.
And there are not sufficient places out there to take them. Again, that's why we're looking at more of a comprehensive program to deal with domestic violence. We have to have somebody working with law enforcement. You know, police work a long time ago learned that when you come up across a problem you can't handle, you call for help. And we call it mutual aid. I mean, we can call departments, we can call state agencies in to deal with fires, floods, riots, you name it. Now it's time, with the sheriff's support, we're going to call for mutual aid in dealing with domestic violence. We need DPSS in there to provide some financial assistance for these women so that they can take their kids and become self-sufficient. Otherwise, the tendency is to go back where they will get that financial support.
Right.
We need the mental health professionals,
from the
right?
Yeah. Plus, this offers a woman, I think this program would offer the women information, so they have more options to choose from.
Yes. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles, is that many women don't realize what options are available to them.
Right.
And I think that's why your center is so helpful and so wonderful, because it takes a woman step by step by step at a time when you can't think straight. You can't even imagine how you're going to help yourself out of a situation or into a better one. There's no vision of that. So I think that your organization is just wonderful.
And I don't know if your experience, but one of our experiences that we see is that the women who come into the shelter, many times our shelter worker will say, well, she's sleeping too much, which when we look at it, that's a sign of depression. And these women come in chronically depressed, which prevents them from taking action that would protect themselves.
Yeah, they've got PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, one aspect of that is severe depression. And in depression, you can't even imagine any kind of positive outcome somewhere down the line. There's no energy for that.
Now, Ellen, when they come to you to be counseled, do you ever take the initiative and talk to them about the shelters that are available or other organizations?
Yes, and most of the time there's a lot of shame about going to a shelter. I don't need to go to a shelter. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a teacher. I'm a therapist. Only those people go to a shelter, and there's no Going to a shelter may mean your safety. If you can honestly take into consideration that there's truly a risk of your life.
Yes.
And that's something you got to convince somebody, because the denial is so intense.
God, I tell you, I knew this would be a tough subject and a very interesting one, important, difficult. Unfortunately, we're coming to an end. Time has gone really fast. So I have about a minute. If any one of you has something really important that you should maybe get across, we have about 30 seconds for that. And unfortunately, we have to close the show after that.
Start with Chuck.
Say if they need help, please call for help. We'll be available, and we want to provide some kind of service.
Right. As a board member of Rainbow, I'd like to say that Rainbow is here to help in more ways than you can possibly dream.
In any way that we can.
Right.
And I'd like the women out there to know that they matter, they're important, and they're valuable, and their lives are valuable, and they have the right to stay safe.
Okay, well, God, that's wonderful, all of you. I want to thank all of you, Janet, Chuck, Alan, and Connie,
Thank you.
for being such wonderful guests, and maybe we can discuss it again at some other time. But in the meantime, you're all doing such great work, and hopefully you can continue with the help you have, and who knows, maybe the statistics will go down at one point, but let's just keep hoping for the better. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank my audience. I hope you had, this was as important to you as it was to me. And I hope we will all learn from what we heard today. And until I see you again, bye-bye.